She can sit in the back with the coats. My mother said it loud enough for the entire departure lounge to hear. Economy passengers don't mingle with the family. I was 41 years old. I had 17 letters behind my name and a decade of court rulings under my belt. I was standing in Terminal 1 at Pearson International with a boarding pass for seat 38F wedged between my fingers, while my mother handed out business class tickets to my brother and his wife like she was distributing prizes at a school fair. Nobody in that lounge moved. A woman in a red parka looked away. A man pretending to read a newspaper stopped pretending. My mother turned back to my brother and laughed about something. My sister-in-law adjusted her carry-on. And I stood there holding my boarding pass, thinking about the $11,400 I had transferred to my mother's line of credit the week before, the same line of credit she'd been defaulting on since my father died. If you've ever been the invisible one in your own family, the one who fixes everything from a distance while they take the credit from up close, then you already know exactly where this is going. But to understand why I finally stopped fixing it, you need to come back with me to the Christmas dinner that cracked something open inside me. The one where my brother announced his promotion and my mother cried happy tears, and nobody mentioned that his firm existed because I had quietly guaranteed his initial business loan 8 years ago when he couldn't find a cosigner. That was the night I started counting. I grew up in a 3-bedroom semi-detached in Mississauga, the kind of house where the carpet was perpetually damp and the radiator knocked all winter. My father worked shifts at the Lakeshore plant and my mother cleaned offices downtown 3 nights a week. They worked hard, I don't take that from them. But somewhere in the gap between my childhood and my brother Kevin's, something shifted. Kevin was 4 years younger and about 40 years more charming. He had our mother's smile and our father's easy laugh, and a gift for being in the room when something good happened and somewhere else when something needed doing. I was the one who stayed behind to help with dinner. I was the one who sat with my father when his back flared up. I was the one who drove my mother to her appointments, who filed the insurance claims, who read the fine print on the lease when they had to downsize after Dad retired. I loved my family. That's the part nobody wants to talk about. You don't keep doing what I did for 19 years if you don't love somebody. But love in my family had a strange topology. It flowed in one direction, and I was always at the bottom of the gradient. I got a full scholarship to the University of Toronto when I was 17. My mother didn't come to my convocation. Kevin had a hockey tournament that weekend, and someone had to drive. When I got into law school, she said, "Well, just make sure you don't get too busy to call." When I was called to the bar, she sent a card with a grocery store gift card inside and a note that said the font was very official looking. Kevin got a business degree from a university in Guelph, largely on my parents' dime, and came home with a business plan he'd printed on thick paper and a partner who wore expensive watches. My mother framed the business plan. It's still on her wall, behind glass, next to a photo of Kevin at his convocation. I love my brother. That's also a thing nobody wants to believe. But I do. I love him the way you love someone who has been given a map of the world and never once thought to ask who drew it. By the time I was 32, I was a partner at a mid-sized litigation firm in downtown Toronto. I kept my name out of the press. I had clients who paid serious money for discretion, and I extended that discretion to my own life as a matter of habit. I had also by that point been quietly redirecting a portion of my income toward my family for 6 years. Not lavishly, methodically, a transfer here, a bill paid there. When my mother's furnace died in February of 2017, I covered the replacement without being asked. When Kevin's new business started hemorrhaging cash in its second year, I co-signed a credit facility at TD for $80,000, routing it through a numbered company so it looked like a business lender. He told people he had great relationships with alternative financing. He gave a talk about it at a Chamber of Commerce event. I know because I attended. I sat in the third row and watched my brother explain his entrepreneurial genius to 60 people who applauded. He didn't introduce me. He didn't know I was there. That was the year I realized something important. Kevin didn't know what I had done for him because I had never told him. I had never told him because something in me believed, genuinely believed, that one day my mother would see it, that she would connect the dots, that she would look at me the way she looked at my brother and understand. She never did. By Christmas 2023, Kevin's firm was thriving. He had 12 employees, a downtown office on King Street, and a corporate card with a limit I didn't ask about. He had just bought my mother a Vitamix blender and a weekend stay at the Millcroft Inn for her birthday. She called me from the spa to tell me about the heated pool. I spent that Christmas Eve doing a contract review for a client whose closing was December 27th. I sent my mother a fruit arrangement and a gift card to her favorite garden center. She called 2 days later to say the pears were a bit grainy. The Christmas dinner itself was a week later at Kevin's house in Oakville. His wife, a woman named Tara, had done the house in seasonal white and gold. There were 12 people at the table, including Kevin's business partner and the man's wife, my mother's friend Dorothy, Kevin and Tara's 2 kids, and me. I sat at the far end, next to the children's side table that had been annexed to the main table with a card table and a tablecloth that didn't quite match. My mother had assigned seats. She gave Kevin's partner and his wife the chairs closest to the kitchen. The warm end, she said, because they're important guests. She put me at the cold end. Tara had made a standing rib roast. Kevin carved it and placed the first cut on his partner's plate with a small bow. The second cut went to his partner's wife, the third to my mother, then he served the children, then Tara. There were no more prime cuts. He handed me a plate with the end piece, the overcooked exterior, mostly char, and said, without looking up, "Hope you're not fussy. You know how it is. I know exactly how it is." My mother clinked her glass. She wanted to make an announcement. Kevin's firm had just signed a major contract with a logistics company in Hamilton. It was worth, she said, leaning forward, a great deal of money. She looked at Kevin with the expression she used to reserve for his hockey goals. Kevin's partner raised his glass. Tara dabbed her eye. Then my mother turned to me and said, "And what about you? Still doing the same thing? Still at the firm?" "Yes." She turned back to Kevin. "Tell them about the Hamilton people." Kevin's partner looked at me with polite curiosity. "What kind of law do you practice?" Before I could answer, my mother said, "Corporate something. She doesn't really talk about it at family events. Very hush-hush." She made a dismissive gesture with her fork. "Very boring," she says. "I have never said that, not once in my life." After dinner, Kevin handed my mother an envelope. Inside was a check. I saw it briefly, $5,000, and a card with a photo of the Millscroft Inn printed on the prep website, to Kevin's face in her hands. "My boy," she said, "my generous boy." She didn't look at me across the table. She didn't notice that the card table my chair was pushed against had wobbled every time I reached for my water glass. She didn't know that 3 weeks earlier I had made the minimum payment on her line of credit, again, because she'd maxed it at the bay buying Kevin's family Christmas gifts. After dinner, I helped clear the plates while Tara supervised the kids. My mother and Kevin sat in the living room with his partner talking about the Hamilton contract. At one point, I heard my mother say, very quietly, "She's fine. She just never really had his drive." I was holding a plate of leftover potatoes. I set it down on the counter very carefully. That was the night I started thinking about the launch codes. I drove home to my condo in Liberty Village through a light January snow. The 427 was quiet. When I got upstairs, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of scotch. Open, the one I keep for bad weeks, and I opened my banking app. I scrolled back through 27 months of transfers. I got out a notepad and I added them up $341,000, give or take. $341,000, transferred, co-signed, guaranteed, or quietly paid over 9 years. I sat with that number for a long time. I didn't cancel anything that night. I had a closing the next morning and I needed to sleep. But I put a note in my calendar for January 15th that said simply, "Review standing orders." What I didn't know, when I made that calendar note, was that the family trip to Banff was already being organized. My mother called in the first week of February. Kevin had booked a 4-night stay at the Fairmont Banff Springs for her birthday. His firm was flying everyone out. Business class for Kevin, Tara, the kids, and my mother. She'd already picked her room. Mountain View. "And you should come," she said. "It'll be fun. What would I fly in?" A pause. "Oh, well, Kevin got a deal on the business class tickets through his travel agent. There wasn't really a group rate for, you'd just book your own economy?" Another pause. Shorter. "Well, it's not that far. Calgary is only 4 hours. She then told me that since Kevin was covering the hotel, it would be a bit awkward for me to stay at the Fairmont. Something about room block minimums and corporate rates she didn't fully understand. And that she'd looked up a very nice Holiday Inn in Banff Town Center that had good reviews on Google. She'd already sent me the link. I looked up the link later. It was 17 minutes from the Fairmont by shuttle. She also mentioned, as an aside, that someone needed to coordinate the luggage through the Calgary airport because Kevin's kids had a lot of gear, ski equipment, car seats, the travel stroller, and Kevin's back had been bothering him. "You're so organized," she said. "You always know what to do with that kind of thing." I said I'd think about it. What I was actually thinking about was a case I'd recently closed. A wrongful dismissal matter involving a woman who had given 14 years to a company that terminated her by email. She sat across from me in the boardroom on the first day and said, very quietly, "I kept waiting for them to see how much I cared." I'd thought about that sentence for weeks. She won, in the end, significant damages. She walked out of the settlement meeting with her spine straight and her hands steady. I kept thinking about her hands. On March 2nd, I flew to Calgary with the rest of the family. Economy, as discussed. Seat 37D, middle row, no window. My mother and Kevin were in business class. I watched them disappear through the priority lane at Pearson. Tara waved at me. Kevin didn't look back. I landed at YC 40 minutes after departure and waited at Carousel 3 for 40 minutes while Kevin's ski bags took their time. I hauled everything onto 2 trolleys while Kevin took a call and Tara managed the children, and my mother stood near the exit, talking to another woman from her book club who, it turned out, was on the same flight and also had a Fairmont booking, and who looked at me, pushing 2 overloaded trolleys through the arrivals hall, with a very specific expression I recognized immediately. It was pity. The shuttle to Banff was 90 minutes. My mother and Kevin's family were booked on the hotel's private transfer. I took the Brewster coach. That night, everyone had dinner at the hotel. My mother called it a family dinner and said I should come. I took the shuttle from my Holiday Inn and walked through the lobby of the Fairmont Banff Springs at 7 in the evening. If you've never been there, the lobby is something out of a 19th century painting. Vaulted stone ceilings, chandeliers, the smell of pine and old money. My mother was already seated at a round table in the main dining room, next to Kevin and his partner, who had apparently driven up from Calgary for the evening. There was no chair for me at the round table. There was an adjacent two-top, clearly meant for overflow, and my mother gestured toward it with a small wave. We ran out of seats. The hotel doesn't allow extra chairs at round tables. Something about the fire code. I sat at the two-top, alone. The waiter came and asked if I was waiting for someone. I said no. He looked at the round table, then back at me, and didn't say anything. He was very professional. My mother ordered the elk tenderloin. Kevin's partner ordered the bison short rib. Tara had the halibut. Kevin ordered a bottle of Burgundy for the table. He didn't extend it to the two-top. At some point during the main course, Kevin's partner leaned across and asked me what I did. My mother answered before I could open my mouth. She's a lawyer, very technical work, not the exciting kind. She turned back to the partner. Kevin, tell him about the Hamilton expansion. Later, when the dessert came, a shared charcuterie and cheese board placed at the center of the round table, well beyond my reach. My mother slid a small envelope across the two-top's corner. I found this in my bag, she said. Canadian Tire money. I've been saving it. Probably enough for a coffee tomorrow morning if you add your own change. She said it lightly, like a joke. Kevin smiled. Tara was talking to the children. Kevin's partner politely looked at his cheese. I picked up the envelope. I felt the thin paper between my fingers. Canadian Tire money. Enough for a coffee if I added my own change. From the woman whose credit card I'd paid down 3 weeks ago. In the dining room of a hotel I was not invited to stay in. Under the table, I had my phone. I opened the banking app to the standing order dashboard. The cursor hovered over the transfer that went out on the 15th of every month. Not yet, but almost. The next morning, I was at the Calgary Courts Center by 8 a.m. not physically, by video, from the Hotel Business Center. I'd scheduled a bail review for a client whose case couldn't move. The Crown was making procedural arguments I needed to address in real time. I had my laptop, my case file, my robe hanging over the back of the chair. My mother texted at 9, "Are you coming to ski?" Kevin rented everyone gear. "There's a lesson at 10. I replied that I had a court appearance. She sent back, "You booked a vacation and brought work? That's so you." The hearing ran until noon. I packed up, changed out of my robe, and walked into the hotel corridor just as Kevin's partner, the one from dinner, was walking the other direction with a coffee. He stopped. He looked at me. Then he looked at the laptop bag and the collapsed robe and the case file under my arm, and something shifted in his expression. "What was the case?" he asked. "Bail review." Crown was arguing flight risk on a man who hasn't missed a court date in 14 months. He was quiet for a moment. "Did you win?" "He's going home to his family tonight instead of the Riemann Center. So yes." He nodded slowly. He looked like he was rearranging something in his mind. "Kevin mentioned you did corporate work." "Kevin's not always current on my file," I said. I kept my voice level. "I do criminal defense. Have for 12 years. He opened his mouth, closed it, nodded again. Then he said very quietly, "The Hamilton contract, the co-signer on Kevin's original facility. That was a numbered company out of Toronto." He wasn't asking, he was connecting something. I didn't confirm or deny. I said, "Have a good afternoon," and walked toward the elevator. That evening at dinner, I watched Kevin pour wine for the table and tell a story about a meeting in Vancouver that had gone sideways and how he'd talked his way through it. His partner laughed in the right places, but his eyes came to me twice. The second time, he held the look half a beat longer than social convention required. On the morning of the last day, we were all leaving from Calgary. The hotel's private transfer took Kevin, Tara, the kids, and my mother to the airport. I took the Brewster coach again. At the Air Canada check-in at YYC, my mother spotted me across the hall. She waved me over to the business class line. "Come say goodbye properly. We're in a different lane, but you can come over for a minute." I walked over. She looked at my carry-on, which was one bag because I pack efficiently, and said, "Oh, you travel so light. That's the economy way, isn't it? Nothing to check." She said it warmly, like she was noting something charming about a child. Kevin put his arm around Tara. Tara was talking to the kids. Then my mother turned to the check-in agent and said loudly, Can she at least stand here while we check in? She's economy, but she's family. The agent looked at me. I looked at the agent. And something inside me, the thing I had been holding in place for 9 years with both hands, made a decision that my conscious mind caught up to about 3 seconds later. I stepped up to the counter beside my mother. I placed my bag down. I reached into my jacket and I set down my Law Society card, my business card from the firm, the one that read partner, criminal defense, and my Nexus card. I said to the agent, I need to speak to your Air Canada supervisor about a customer service matter. This passenger, and I nodded toward my mother, made a statement in the public area of this terminal that I'd like to address on the record. My mother's face went to stone. What are you doing? I didn't look at her. I'm also going to need you to note in the file that I'll be traveling in business class today. I have points sufficient for an upgrade. I should have done this when I booked. The supervisor arrived in 2 minutes. She was efficient, professional, and quietly horrified by what she'd witnessed. She'd been standing near the premium check-in desk when my mother's comment about the economy way carried across the hall. She upgraded my seat before I finished explaining. Kevin said nothing. He was watching his partner, who had just joined the queue, and was watching me with the same rearranged expression he'd had in the hotel corridor. My mother hissed, "You're embarrassing us." I turned to her for the first time since I'd stepped to the counter. I kept my voice the way I keep it in court. Not cold, not hot, just precise. You seated me alone at a two-top last night while you used a fire code as an excuse. You gave me Canadian Tire money for coffee and called it a gift. You told the check-in line I was economy like it was a descriptor of my character. I've been practicing criminal law for 12 years. I've argued in front of the Ontario Court of Appeal. And I have spent 9 years quietly keeping this family financially solvent, including your line of credit, which I paid down in January, and your son's business loan, which I co-signed when he had no other options. The queue had gone very quiet, not because I wanted credit, because I thought it was what families did. I was wrong about that. My mother looked at me like I had turned into something she didn't recognize. Kevin's partner stepped forward slightly. His voice was careful. The numbered company was yours. It wasn't a question. I met his eyes and gave him a single nod. The supervisor handed me a new boarding pass. Business class, window seat, forward cabin. She said, "We hope you enjoy the flight," and her face said something else entirely. My mother reached for my arm. I stepped back. "You can't just," she started. "I can." I picked up my bag. I have been the person who fixes things for 19 years. I am choosing not to be that person anymore. That's not abandonment. That's self-preservation. I walked through the priority lane. She called after me, something about blood and ingratitude and everything she had done. Her voice bounced off the terminal ceiling in that particular acoustic way that airports have, where sound carries further than anyone intends. People turned. People watched. I didn't turn back. In the forward cabin, I sat in 3A. The seat was wide enough to work. The window showed the Rockies at altitude, sharp and white and indifferent. A flight attendant brought me a coffee without my asking. Proper coffee, in a real cup. I opened my laptop. I had a sentencing memo to finish for a Thursday morning appearance. But first I opened the banking app, 4 taps. The standing transfer, $2,200 a month to my mother's line of credit, canceled. The TD cosign agreement was more complex, but I had already emailed my contact at the bank on the morning of day 2 of the trip. The process was in motion. 9 years of transfers, cosigns, and quiet maintenance. Terminated over the Rockies at 37,000 feet, somewhere between Banff and home. I closed the app. I finished my coffee. I opened the sentencing memo. Kevin texted at some point over Saskatchewan. "What the hell was that?" I didn't respond until we landed. By then, I had finished the memo, started a new one, and made notes for a bail hearing the following Tuesday. When I turned my phone off airplane mode, I had 14 messages. My mother, Kevin, Tara, an aunt I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, 2 cousins, Dorothy from the book club, and Kevin's wife's mother, who I had met exactly twice. Kevin's partner had sent a single message through LinkedIn. "I owe you an apology. I've been funding a myth. Call me if you want to talk." I read it twice. I didn't call him. That wasn't my problem to fix either. I got a cab home from Pearson. Liberty Village in the dark, light snow again, the city doing its ordinary thing. I walked into my condo, put my bag down, fed my cat, a gray tabby named Clive who has never once asked me to carry his luggage, and poured 2 fingers of Oban. I sat in my reading chair by the window, and I looked out at the CN Tower and the lake and the particular orange-gray of a Toronto winter sky. My mother's last voicemail, the one that came through just before I unlocked my door, lasted 4 minutes. She talked about sacrifice and family loyalty and the fact that she had carried me for 9 months and worked 3 nights a week for 20 years and never asked for anything in return. She had, in fact, asked for a great deal in return. That was the whole architecture of the problem. I listened to the whole message. Then I put the phone face down on the side table. 3 weeks later, I got a certified letter from my mother's bank. The line of credit was in arrears. She had until the end of the month to make a minimum payment or the account would go to collections. She forwarded it to me with a post-it note that said, "See what you've done." I called the bank and confirmed that I had no liability on the account. The woman on the phone was very pleasant and confirmed that yes, the account was solely in my mother's name. I put the forwarded letter in my filing cabinet, not because I planned to do anything with it, just because I've learned that documentation matters. My brother texted twice more over the following month. The first was an explanation. He hadn't known about the cosign, he said, hadn't known about the monthly transfers. Was genuinely shocked, he said. I believed him, actually. That was almost the worst part. He wasn't lying. He just hadn't looked closely enough at anything to wonder how the numbers kept working out. The second text was shorter. It said, "She's really struggling. I can't cover everything myself. Is there any way we could talk?" I replied, "I'm glad you're stepping up. You'll figure it out." I haven't heard from him since. Kevin's partner, whose name is Aldous, which I've always found an improbable name for someone so straightforwardly decent, did call, eventually, not to fix anything. Just to say that he'd done some checking and understood now why the numbered company's capital had arrived at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right structure. "I thought Kevin was better with money than I gave him credit for," he said. Turns out it wasn't his money I should have been measuring. We had coffee. It was a normal conversation. He didn't ask me for anything. That was new. The sentencing memo went in on Thursday. The judge gave my client a conditional sentence with community service hours. He shook my hand in the hallway outside the courtroom. His daughter was with him. She looked about 12, dark braids, the particular expression children have when something frightening has just resolved itself. And she said, very seriously, "Thank you for bringing my dad home." I thought about that on the drive back to the office. I thought about the two-top table at the Fairmont, about the Canadian Tire money, about the standing transfer I'd finally canceled somewhere over the Rockies. Here's the thing about being the person who holds everything together from underneath. It's invisible work. You do it because you love people, or because you were taught that love looks like sacrifice, or because somewhere in your childhood you learned that keeping quiet was the price of belonging. You do it for so long that it starts to feel like gravity. Just the way things are, inescapable and unremarkable and permanent. And then one day someone calls you economy in a check-in line, and you realize that gravity is a choice you can stop making. I still practice criminal law. I still sit in holding rooms with people who've made terrible decisions and try to help them find a path through. I still argue in front of judges who need to be convinced, and crown attorneys who need to be managed, and clients who need to understand that the system is imperfect and that I will do everything I can within it. What I don't do anymore is pay for people who hand me Canadian Tire money and call it generosity. The cat is fine, by the way. Clive turned 9 in April. He has never once introduced me to a room by saying I do technical, not exciting work. He curls up on the end of the bed and minds his own business and occasionally walks across my laptop, which is annoying but at least honest. The family is managing. They will continue to manage. They are not my project anymore. Some legacies are worth inheriting. The rest you leave on a baggage carousel at YYC and let someone else sort out.